said to me, "Paul, you kicked the circle. You can't kick the circle. Once you kick the circle, you're done. It'll never be the same for you."
You may not know it, but you're familiar with the concept of kicking the circle. Maybe you've seen it in your city or county, the blowback that happens when someone upsets the plans of the powerful, the schemes of the good old boys. You point out a violation of law, ask questions about contracts that are conveniently awarded to well-connected vendors, or try to pass an initiative. The folks in the circle of power take notice, and funny things start to happen. Maybe you get a phone call, a friendly warning. Perhaps local law enforcement make a few passes by your house, or that long-forgotten legal issue gets a fresh look from the local prosecutor and judge.
On my way home, one of my best friends calls me, and he says, "Paul, what have you done?" And I said, "Man, I just had this meeting." He says, "Well, there's a bunch of county officials here. I don't know what you did, but they keep saying your name, and it's nothing positive."
Even if the exertion of power has its intended effect, it exposes the circle to unwanted attention and might even open it up in a way that ends in its destruction. Texas has a long history of power creation and abuse, and this story of an election in Blanco County takes place just south of the birthplace of one of the most well-known creators of power in U.S. history. LBJ was a self-described master of finding, creating, and wielding influence. Author Robert Caro has spent more than 50 years chronicling LBJ's life and his penchant for power.
Now, Lyndon Johnson was the great legislative genius. You know what he says? He says, "Whatever else they say about me, I understand power. I know where to look for it, and I know how to use it."
Johnson was ruthless in his pursuit of power, and once he had it, he used it to the benefit of himself and his cronies. At the age of 26, he became FDR's man in Texas when he was appointed to be the state director of the National Youth Administration. That role allowed him to distribute jobs, favors, and funding, which he used to create a network that would ultimately propel him to the Senate and presidency.
My son pointed out to me the ranch that was part of our life. When it was established with the help of LBJ and a man named Winters. All the movers and shakers of Texas back in the day came through here. They did a lot of corrupt things. They were making deals, side deals, and all those things here.
That ranch is just outside of Johnson City, where LBJ was born, raised, and revered for bringing the lights. Dragging electricity out to Blanco County was a feat, an expensive one, or lucrative depending on your perspective. But the feat was real regardless. The area was remote when Johnson was a child, and it was still remote when he died in 1969, but that's changing. The landscape of the hill country, once exclusively marked by cedars and wandering longhorns, is spotted with subdivisions spiraling out from Austin. As sprawl from major metros reaches out into what has historically been hinterlands, local residents and officials alike are struggling to assert themselves productively to preserve a way of life.
I think we're losing that battle at this point because we're not anti-growth. I think without growth, you will fail. We don't want to be a ghost town, but we want to hang on to the things that make us Johnson City at the same time.
It was this desire to preserve that led a handful of Blanco County residents to create a new town just south of Johnson City. Paul Deal, confronted with the very real change headed his way, decided to act.
You know, we have a couple hundred people that live here in this end of the road, and the rest of it's ranches. And we're literally 2 ranches from Johnson City. So one of those ranches gets developed, and it's over with. Our whole environment's going to change. So us having a city would give us that ability to speak with one voice.
Incorporating a small city to have a seat at the table when it comes to conservation and decision-making seems like a sound approach, and one that shouldn't have been controversial. Presumably, this is the same posture towards growth that others in the community would have. But even if that was the case, Paul's efforts were unwelcome. And without knowing it, Paul was about to kick the circle. Creating a new city in Texas is supposed to be straightforward. All you need is an area with between 200 and 5,000 inhabitants. You apply to the county judge, who must approve the application and call for an election. Here's attorney Bud Wymore explaining the process.
The county judge has the discretion to accept or reject that application based on one thing. Does the area that they're trying to incorporate have the required number of inhabitants? And if it does, then the Texas Supreme Court has been very clear. There's no discretion.
In 2022, Paul and a handful of Blanco County residents approached County Judge Brett Bray
with an application and the necessary signatures to incorporate a city called Hobbs.
We scheduled this meeting, we went there, and it was a very, very strange and odd meeting. I'd never had that experience that we had. It was very rude, didn't shake our hands. We sit down there, we show them a little map of what we were doing and try to explain to them what we were doing.
Paul's application was submitted, and then Judge Brett Bray rejected it. The Blanco County residents Paul had worked with to organize were miffed, but they were undeterred. 2 years later, in 2024, they redoubled their efforts to create Hobbs, only to be met with more opposition. Opposition linked to Judge Bray.
We presented ample evidence very early on that there were more than 201 inhabitants in the proposed Hobbs area. And based on that, I think Judge Bray should have swiftly signed the order calling the election, but for whatever reason, he made the decision not to.
Remember, find an area with more than 200 people and fill out an application, and the election is supposed to be ordered.
The second time was very difficult. By then, most of the people knew the judge didn't want to do this.
In August 2024, Judge Bray scheduled a public hearing on the application. Again, like the other activities called for, a meeting is not prescribed in statute. Still, during the meeting, the county attorney can be heard recounting how she, a sheriff's deputy, and another county commissioner drove through an RV park to invalidate the number of inhabitants. Not mentioned by Judge Bray during the hearing was his conflict of interest.
There are certain things that constitute a conflict of interest. One of those can be in certain scenarios when an elected official owns property, has a business interest in something that's being decided.
During the hearing, Judge Bray's wife, Linda, delivered remarks in opposition to the city's creation.
For the first time when she spoke, we learned that Linda Bray owned what she referred to as her sole and separate property within the Hobbs area. And that was the first thing that led us to have any degree of concern.
What might be the coup de grace of Bray's public hearing against Hobbs was when he read a letter he allegedly received from a proponent of Hobbs.
Then he pointed over to the list that they had brought in, all the people that had signed the petition. So he says, go over there and look at all the people that signed the petition. So he was calling out the people that I got to sign, like to put them on the spotlight. Why would you do that? You're painting this as an evil thing, and then you're saying these people are the ones that signed to get this done.
The mayor speaking at the hearing was notable. She didn't have any property in what would have been Hobbs, but was there speaking on behalf of her neighbors. When I asked her if she would have been opposed to the city had her questions been adequately addressed, her response was surprising.
I think if we'd been able to have an open conversation, I don't think I would have even been opposed to it even if they were levying a property tax, because I think at the end of the day, like if I were trying to protect my ranch and I had the opportunity to create a city, I think I would, because there's a lot of power in it.
By the time of Bray's hearing in 2024, the community was awash in rumors, and the judge's activity was having an impact. After learning of Linda Bray's property ownership, the pro-Hobbs activists called for the judge's recusal.
We referenced what we thought was a concern under Chapter 171 of the Local Government Code.
The concern was Bray's wife's property ownership, her opposition to the city, and the judge's continued oversight of the election. Judge Bray recused himself, but, as we'll soon see, he couldn't resist reinserting himself into the process. A judge from the neighboring county, Judge Waldrop, was brought in to oversee the election.
Despite the fact that there was an order of recusal, Judge Bray began doing some of the things that would have normally been reserved for the county judge.
And the judge, after recusing himself, interjected himself again and again and again.
Following Judge Waldrop ordering the election, Judge Bray did certain things, signing notices, setting deadlines, accepting candidate applications, rejecting candidate applications. The dispute that ensued thereafter was centered on whether or not Judge Bray had the authority to do those things or should have been doing those things.
Despite the recusal order, on February 14th, 2025, Judge Bray reinserted himself into the process and signed an order setting the deadline for city council candidates to file with him and not Judge Waldrop.
Well, the 2 weeks are up. Then we get a letter saying that 2 of our candidates were disqualified for some technical error.
The citizens fighting to establish the city of Hobbs took the matter to court.
Now, one of the things that we heard when we had a hearing is that Judge Bray and/or the county had approval from the Secretary of State's office, the Elections Division, to do those things.
As it turns out, the Secretary of State did not greenlight Judge Bray's actions. Then, shortly before the election, an additional reason for Bray's opposition was discovered.
30 days before the election, we find out that the judge and his family owns 1,300 acres that adjoins the proposed city of Hobbs.
Following this discovery, the folks working to incorporate Hobbs filed for a temporary restraining order. Interestingly, no representative from the county showed up at that TRO hearing, but it was granted. Then, a hearing to establish a permanent injunction against Bray was held, and Bray, tellingly, was a no-show.
Judge Bray has recused himself, and he must refrain from doing anything that a county judge would normally do in this type of scenario. Judge Waldrop is running this election, Judge Bray is not.
Lord Acton famously said, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." In Texas, power has been created and retained by an established network through elections and rigging them.
We may not like to hear it, but stolen elections are a part of political power in the United States.
There are lots of ways to manipulate an election outcome. When it comes to LBJ, most people are familiar with the ballot stuffing of Box 13. But that wasn't the only election he meddled with. Johnson stole his first election while at Southwest Texas State Teachers College, a student government contest. When he was a staffer in Washington, he cheated to win an election for the leadership of a group of legislative aides. In that case, he had supporters find extra votes. Is there a way to find votes in an election in Texas?
We discovered a letter from the Political Action Committee, Citizens Against Hobbs, Texas, that asked those who own property in the Hobbs, Texas area, but are not registered to vote, or were not presently registered to vote in Hobbs, Texas, to change their voter registration to voting in Hobbs, Texas, so as to be able to vote in the Hobbs, Texas election.
Even though there was clearly meddling taking place, and there appeared to be a conflict of interest behind the activity, the individuals working to incorporate Hobbs didn't go on the attack.
We could have done a lot to get that message out, but we took the high road. We had the election. We lost. I think it's a sad thing that we didn't even get the opportunity, because it was squashed. The judge used his influence, his power, his position to stop his neighbors from trying to create a neighborhood.
When I started investigating the incorporation election, I was told the mayor of Johnson City, Stephanie Fisher, was opposed to the creation of Hobbs because she was in Judge Bray's pocket. Turns out that wasn't right.
But I mean, the truth is absolutely my biggest issues are with the county judge. Every day I run into something that I'm dealing with the county judge.
When it came to the incorporation of Hobbs, which again, Fisher opposed, she was upset with Bray's handling of the matter. Fisher, like others, told me stories about the problems that have beset Blanco County under the leadership of Judge Bray. Chief among the issues is the vacant courthouse, sitting in the center of Johnson City in disrepair. Even the individuals I visited who were supportive of Judge Bray said the courthouse restoration has been mismanaged. But that's not the only area of concern for Fisher and others.
The biggest issue right now within the county is the courthouse restoration. So we were all kind of kicked out of the courthouse about a year ago, and all of the offices that were inside of the courthouse have now been moved out. And so the public safety departments within the county are not fans, because there was some boo-boos that happened about a year ago that locked us all out of our NCICT CIC access.
This was an important issue, and one that hits close to home for Fisher. The database is one used by law enforcement to look up driver details when a car is pulled over. Fisher's husband is a county constable, which means his life is on the line when he strolls up to a vehicle. It also means he works for the judge.
My husband is the elected constable for Precinct 1, so he does work closely with the judge, and of course the judge does his budget, so I try to not be too openly oppositional to him, but I've gotten a lot braver in the past 6 months.
The courthouse restoration, the technology contract, the Hobbs election being run by a judge from another county. The issues are stacking up, but they're being kept in the background.
And if you travel at all, this is just a bump in the road. But to them, it's their whole world, and they're terrified that somebody would try to change it. They're a big fish in a little pond, and I think we exposed ourselves to that corruption that we would have been blind to for years if this hadn't happened.
In order to conserve in 2025, Texans will need to create a new town, create new ways of seeing power and how it's used, not to the benefit of Texans, but to the benefit of the entrenched, and to enrich the few. I asked Judge Bray to sit down for an interview, but he declined. Where a simple count me out would suffice, Bray responded with a threat. After multiple interviews with Blanco County residents fearful of the judge, I recognize this as characteristic of him. The misuse of power is unbecoming. You know it when you see it. Bullying, the circle telling you, but sort of begging you in the form of a threat. Please don't kick. Let me tell you, that's when you should, and hard. The story of Hobbs is especially ironic in one regard. A push by citizens to preserve, one that was seemingly in line with the desires of Johnson City and Blanco County natives, was rejected. For what reason? Seemingly out of an obsession with control.
Because there's so many stories of people being taken advantage of, things happening to people in this county that's not right, but they're getting away with it. And there's maybe a chance that this ranch has a part to play at the end of it, at the beginning and the end.
You ask about understanding political power. It's something we all should know. This is the power that shapes all our lives. And in a democracy, we have a hand in conferring it.
When confronted with injustice, most try to make things right, and Texans are uniquely fashioned for this task. Real Texans have grown tired of the circles of power that have metastasized into cancerous growths throughout our great state. Thankfully, people are pushing back, tired of being taken advantage of, growing weary of the power being abused in the open. It's time for Texans to start kicking the circle.